The sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house like thunder. Keisha stood frozen in the kitchen, still wearing her yellow apron with flour on her hands from making their daughter's favorite cookies. The DNA test results lay crumpled on the floor where her husband James had thrown them just moments before. The numbers were clear, cold, and devastating, 0% match between father and child. "Get out," James had said, his voice shaking with anger. "Take your daughter and get out of my house." Those words kept playing in Keisha's mind like a broken record. Their daughter. He called her your daughter now, not our daughter like he had every day for the past 8 years. The house felt empty even though little Emma was upstairs in her room, probably wondering why Daddy was shouting. Keisha picked up the papers with trembling fingers. The test was from a lab she had never heard of. She had never asked for this test. She had never given permission for it. Yet here it was, destroying her family. Keisha had met James 12 years ago at a coffee shop near the university. She was studying to become a nurse, and he was finishing his business degree. They fell in love over shared study sessions and long walks around campus. She was the quiet girl from the south side of town, and he was the ambitious young man with big dreams. Their different backgrounds never mattered to them. Love was supposed to conquer all. They married 3 years later in a simple ceremony. Keisha's family was small, just her mother and younger brother who lived 2 states away. James's family was bigger and more traditional. His parents had always been polite to Keisha, but she sometimes felt like they were watching her, waiting for something to go wrong. When Emma was born, Keisha thought she had finally found her place in the world. The baby had James's blue eyes and Keisha's stubborn chin. She was perfect. James was over the moon, calling everyone he knew to announce the birth. He carried pictures of Emma everywhere and talked about teaching her to ride bikes and helping with homework. Now, 8 years later, that same man was telling them to leave. Keisha sat down at the kitchen table and tried to think. She had never cheated on James. Never even thought about it. But the test said Emma wasn't his daughter. How was that possible? Emma came running down the stairs, her pigtails bouncing. "Mommy, why was Daddy yelling? Is he sick?" She climbed onto Keisha's lap, her small arms wrapping around her mother's neck. "Daddy is just upset about something, baby," Keisha whispered, holding her daughter close. "It's going to be okay." But Keisha wasn't sure anything would ever be okay again. She had no job since she quit nursing when Emma was born. They had 1 car, and it was in James's name. Their savings account needed both signatures. She had given up everything to be a wife and mother, and now she had nothing. That night, Keisha and Emma slept in the guest room. James locked himself in their bedroom and wouldn't come out. Keisha could hear him on the phone, probably talking to his brother or his parents. She pressed her ear to the door once and heard him say, "I knew something was off. I should have done this test years ago." The next morning, James was already gone when Keisha woke up. He left a note on the kitchen counter saying he was staying at his brother's house. He wanted them gone by the weekend. Keisha had 3 days to figure out how to rebuild her entire life. She called her mother, but the phone just rang and rang. Her brother was deployed overseas with the military. She had a few friends from the old neighborhood, but she hadn't talked to them in years. James had never liked her old friends, said they were too loud and inappropriate for a woman with her new status in life. Keisha spent the morning looking through old boxes in the basement, searching for anything that might help her understand what was happening. She found Emma's hospital records, her own medical files from the pregnancy, even the ultrasound pictures. Everything looked normal. Everything showed that Emma was born healthy and on time. She also found their wedding album. The pictures showed a happy couple surrounded by family and friends. James looked at her in those photos like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Keisha touched the pictures and wondered where that man had gone. By afternoon, Emma was asking more questions. "Where's Daddy? When is he coming home? Can we call him?" Keisha didn't know what to say. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that her father doesn't think she's his daughter anymore? Keisha decided to call the lab that did the DNA test. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe the samples got mixed up. The woman on the phone was polite but firm. The test was accurate. The samples were properly labeled. There was no mistake. "But I never authorized this test," Keisha said. "How did you get samples from my daughter?" "Ma'am, the test was ordered by James Mitchell. He provided the samples for both himself and the child. Everything was done according to proper procedures." Keisha's heart sank. James had taken samples from Emma without telling her. Maybe a strand of hair from her brush or her toothbrush. He had been planning this for who knows how long. That evening, Keisha sat Emma down for a talk. Baby, Daddy, and Mommy are having some problems right now. We might have to go stay with someone else for a while. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Did I do something wrong? Is Daddy mad at me? No, sweetie. You didn't do anything wrong. You're perfect, and Mommy loves you so much. Keisha held her daughter tight, promising herself she would figure this out. She would prove she never cheated. She would save her family. But as she tucked Emma into bed that night, Keisha wondered if some things, once broken, could ever be fixed again. Keisha didn't sleep much that night. Every sound made her think James was coming home. She kept hoping he would walk through the door, apologize, and say it was all a terrible mistake. But morning came with just silence and an empty driveway. Emma woke up asking for Daddy again. Keisha made pancakes, trying to keep things normal, but Emma barely ate. She kept looking toward the front door like she was waiting for James to come in and flip her pancakes in the air like he always did on Saturday mornings. Mommy, can we call Daddy at work? Emma asked. Daddy isn't at work today, baby. Remember, it's Saturday. Keisha tried to keep her voice steady. Then where is he? Keisha didn't have a good answer. She gave Emma some coloring books and turned on cartoons, then went to the computer in James's office. She needed to understand what was happening. She needed to find out if DNA tests could be wrong. The computer was password protected now. James had changed it. Keisha tried their anniversary date, Emma's birthday, even their old address. Nothing worked. It was like he was erasing her from his life one step at a time. She used her phone instead, searching for information about DNA testing. What she found made her both hopeful and scared. DNA tests were very accurate, but lab mistakes could happen. Samples could be mixed up. Results could be contaminated. But these mistakes were rare. Keisha also learned that there were other reasons a test might show no match between a father and child. Medical conditions, certain medications, even some rare genetic situations could affect results. She wrote down everything she found. Around noon, James's mother called. Keisha, dear, James told us what happened. We're so sorry this has to be so difficult. Mrs. Mitchell had always been formal with Keisha. Never warm, but never mean either. Just careful. Mrs. Mitchell, I think there's been a mistake with the test. I never cheated on James. Emma is his daughter. Oh, honey. There was something in the older woman's voice, like she felt sorry for Keisha but didn't believe her. James is very upset. Maybe it would be best if you gave him some space to think. He wants us out of the house by tomorrow. Yes, he mentioned that. Do you have somewhere to go? Keisha's pride wanted her to say yes, but desperation made her honest. Not really. My mother isn't answering her phone. I don't have much money. Well, there's a nice hotel on the east side of town. Very clean and reasonable. A hotel. James's mother was suggesting she take Emma to live in a hotel because her son didn't believe the DNA test could be wrong. Keisha felt anger rising in her chest. Mrs. Mitchell, Emma is your granddaughter. She's been your granddaughter for 8 years. One test doesn't change that. Keisha, dear, I know this is hard, but the test shows what it shows. James is devastated. We all are. After Mrs. Mitchell hung up, Keisha realized that James's family had probably believed the worst about her from the beginning. Maybe they had always been waiting for proof that she wasn't good enough for their son. Keisha spent the afternoon going through her jewelry box, looking for anything valuable she could sell. She found her engagement ring, her wedding ring, a necklace James gave her for their first anniversary. It all felt meaningless now. She also packed 2 suitcases, one for her and one for Emma. She didn't know where they were going, but she couldn't stay where she wasn't wanted. That evening, Emma was unusually quiet during dinner. She pushed her food around on her plate and kept looking at the empty chair where James always sat. Mommy, did Daddy stop loving us? The question broke Keisha's heart. Oh, baby, no. Daddy loves you very much. He's just confused right now. What's he confused about? How do you explain DNA tests to an 8-year-old? How do you explain that sometimes adults make terrible mistakes that hurt everyone? Sometimes grown-ups have problems that are hard to understand, Keisha said finally. But no matter what happens, you are loved. You are wanted. You are perfect. That night, Keisha lay awake making plans. She would take Emma to her mother's house, even though it was a 12-hour drive and her mother hadn't returned her calls. She would find a new place to live. She would get a job. She would start over. But she would also fight for the truth. She would get a second DNA test from a different lab. She would prove she never cheated. She would show James he was wrong. On Sunday morning, Keisha loaded their suitcases into the car. Emma carried her stuffed elephant and her favorite blanket. As they backed out of the driveway, Emma pressed her face against the window. "Are we coming back, Mommy?" Keisha looked at the house where she had been happy for so many years. The place where Emma took her first steps, said her first words, lost her first tooth. "I don't know, baby. I hope so." But as they drove away, Keisha wasn't sure she would ever see that house again. She wasn't sure James would ever forgive her for something she didn't do. She wasn't sure their family could survive this. All she knew was that she had to try. For Emma's sake, she had to try to prove the truth. The drive to Keisha's mother's house took 14 hours with stops. Emma slept in the back seat for most of it, curled up with her elephant. Keisha drove through the night, drinking gas station coffee and trying not to think about what she was going to do if her mother wasn't home. Her mother, Patricia, lived in a small town called Millbrook, about 6 hours south of where Keisha and James had built their life. Patricia had moved there after Keisha's father died 5 years ago. She said she wanted to be somewhere quiet where she could think about things. Keisha hadn't visited in over a year. Life had been so busy with Emma's school activities and James's work functions. Now she wished she had stayed closer to her family. They pulled into her mother's driveway at sunrise. The little white house looked the same, but the garden was overgrown and there were newspapers piled on the front porch. Keisha's heart sank. Maybe her mother wasn't home. Maybe she was traveling or sick or... But then the front door opened and Patricia stepped out in her bathrobe. She was thinner than Keisha remembered, and her hair was completely gray now. But her eyes were the same warm brown that Keisha saw in the mirror every day. "Keisha, baby, what are you doing here?" Keisha started crying before she could say a word. All the fear and anger and sadness from the past few days poured out of her. Patricia rushed to the car and wrapped her arms around her daughter. "Mama, I didn't know where else to go," Keisha sobbed. Emma woke up and climbed out of the car, rubbing her eyes. "Grandma Pat." Patricia scooped up her granddaughter and held her tight. "My sweet girl. Look how big you've gotten." They went inside and Patricia made coffee and scrambled eggs while Keisha told her everything. About the DNA test, about James throwing them out, about having nowhere to go. Patricia listened without interrupting. When Keisha finished, her mother was quiet for a long moment. "You never cheated on that boy," Patricia said finally. "It wasn't a question." "Never, Mama. Not once. I don't understand what's happening. DNA tests can be wrong, can't they? That's what I've been reading about. But James won't listen. He's so angry." Patricia poured more coffee and sat down across from her daughter. "Keisha, I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you a long time ago." Keisha looked up. There was something different in her mother's voice. Something careful and scared. "What is it, Mama?" Patricia glanced toward the living room where Emma was watching cartoons. "Not here. Let's go outside." They sat on the back porch steps, the same steps where Keisha used to sit as a child, dreaming about her future. She never imagined that future would fall apart like this. "Keisha, when you were born, there were some complications. You were in the hospital for 2 weeks." "I know that, Mama. You told me I was premature." "You weren't premature. You were born right on time. But there was a mix-up at the hospital. They had 2 baby girls born that same night, and for a few hours, the nurses weren't sure which baby belonged to which family." Keisha felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What are you saying?" "They figured it out, of course. Blood types and footprints and all that. But for those few hours." Patricia's voice trailed off. "Mama, what are you trying to tell me?" "I'm saying hospitals make mistakes sometimes. Labs make mistakes. People make mistakes." Patricia reached over and took Keisha's hand. "That DNA test could be wrong, baby. You know in your heart you never cheated. Trust that." But Keisha heard something else in her mother's story. Something about mix-ups and mistakes and babies in hospitals. Something that made her wonder if there were other kinds of mix-ups that could happen. "Mama, when Emma was born, were there any problems? Any confusion?" Patricia thought for a moment. "I wasn't there, remember? You had her up north, and I was taking care of your father. He was getting sicker then. But you called me from the hospital and you sounded so happy." Keisha remembered that phone call. She remembered being exhausted but excited. She remembered James pacing the room, making calls to everyone they knew. But she also remembered something else. The hospital had been very busy that week. There was some kind of flu outbreak, and they were short-staffed. A few times, different nurses came in who didn't seem to know Emma's case. One nurse even started to take Emma for tests that were meant for another baby. What if there had been a bigger mix-up? What if somehow? Keisha shook her head. She was being ridiculous. Emma looked like both her and James. She had Keisha's chin and James's eyes. She had James's stubborn streak and Keisha's love for music. But DNA didn't lie, did it? That afternoon, Keisha called 3 different labs in 3 different cities. She scheduled appointments for new DNA tests. If James's test was wrong, she would prove it. Emma spent the day playing in Patricia's backyard, chasing butterflies and picking flowers. She seemed happier here, away from the tension and sadness of the past few days. "Grandma Pat, why don't you have a husband?" Emma asked over dinner. "Well, I did have one. Your grandpa. But he got sick and went to heaven." "Is that what happened to my daddy? Did he get sick and go away?" Patricia looked at Keisha with sad eyes. "No, baby. Your daddy isn't sick. He's just confused about some things right now." That night, after Emma was asleep, Keisha and her mother sat on the porch and talked about the future. Patricia said they could stay as long as they needed. Keisha could look for work in Millbrook, maybe at the hospital or one of the clinics. Emma could start school there if necessary. But what if the new tests prove Emma is James's daughter? Keisha asked. "What if I can fix this?" "Then you'll go home and rebuild your marriage," Patricia said. "But Keisha, even if that happens, things are going to be different. James didn't trust you. He threw you out without even listening to your side. You need to think about whether you can forgive that." Keisha hadn't thought about forgiveness yet. She had been so focused on proving her innocence that she hadn't considered what would happen next. Could she forgive James for not believing her? Could she trust him again? As she lay in her childhood bedroom that night, listening to Emma breathe softly in the bed next to her, Keisha realized this wasn't just about a DNA test anymore. This was about everything her marriage was built on. And she wasn't sure if any of it was as strong as she had thought. "Grandma Pat, why don't you have a husband?" Emma asked over dinner. "Well, I did have one. Your grandpa. But he got sick and went to heaven." "Is that what happened to my daddy? Did he get sick and go away?" Patricia looked at Keisha with sad eyes. "No, baby. Your daddy isn't sick. He's just confused about some things right now." That night, after Emma was asleep, Keisha and her mother sat on the porch and talked about the future. Patricia said they could stay as long as they needed. Keisha could look for work in Millbrook, maybe at the hospital or one of the clinics. Emma could start school there if necessary. But what if the new tests prove Emma is James's daughter? Keisha asked. "What if I can fix this?" "Then you'll go home and rebuild your marriage," Patricia said. "But Keisha, even if that happens, things are going to be different. James didn't trust you. He threw you out without even listening to your side. You need to think about whether you can forgive that." Keisha hadn't thought about forgiveness yet. She had been so focused on proving her innocence that she hadn't considered what would happen next. Could she forgive James for not believing her? Could she trust him again? As she lay in her childhood bedroom that night, listening to Emma breathe softly in the bed next to her, Keisha realized this wasn't just about a DNA test anymore. This was about everything her marriage was built on. And she wasn't sure if any of it was as strong as she had thought. The first DNA test appointment was scheduled for Tuesday morning at a lab in the next town over. Keisha had to drive 40 minutes to get there, but she wanted to make sure she used a completely different company than the one James had used. The technician was a young woman named Lisa who was very gentle with Emma. She explained everything she was doing and let Emma hold a stuffed bear during the cheek swab. "When will we get the results?" Keisha asked. "Usually 3 to 5 business days. We'll call you as soon as they're ready." Keisha also had her own DNA sample taken. She wanted to make sure there was no question about Emma being her daughter. That part of the test had never been in doubt, but Keisha wanted everything to be completely clear. On the drive back to her mother's house, Emma was quiet. Finally, she asked, "Mommy, why did that lady need to look inside my mouth?" "She was just checking something, baby. Like when the doctor looks in your mouth to make sure your teeth are healthy." "Is something wrong with me?" Keisha pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned around to face her daughter. "Emma, listen to me. There is absolutely nothing wrong with you. You are perfect. You are beautiful. You are smart and funny and kind. Whatever is happening between Daddy and me has nothing to do with you being anything less than wonderful." Emma nodded, but Keisha could see she didn't really understand. How could she? 8-year-olds weren't supposed to have to think about DNA tests and family problems. That afternoon, Keisha started looking for work. Her nursing license was still valid, and there were several healthcare facilities in the area. Patricia had given her some clothes that would be appropriate for interviews, and Emma was happy to spend time with her grandmother. The first place Keisha applied was Millbrook Community Hospital. It was smaller than the hospital where she used to work, but it seemed friendly. The head nurse, Mrs. Rodriguez, was impressed by Keisha's experience. "We could definitely use someone with your background," she said. "When would you be available to start?" "Immediately, if needed," Keisha said. "I'm very motivated." Mrs. Rodriguez smiled. "I can tell. Can you start Thursday? Day shift, 3 days a week to begin with." Keisha felt relief wash over her. A job meant independence. A job meant she could take care of Emma no matter what happened with the DNA tests. That evening, she called James for the first time since he had thrown them out. Her hands were shaking as she dialed. He answered on the third ring. "What do you want, Keisha?" His voice was cold, like she was a stranger. This was the man who used to call her just to hear her voice during his lunch breaks. "I wanted to let you know that Emma and I are safe. We're staying with my mother." "Fine. James, I also wanted to tell you that I've scheduled new DNA tests. From different labs. If there was a mistake with the first test." "There was no mistake, Keisha. I checked with the lab 3 times. The test is accurate." "But what if?" "Stop. Just stop." James's voice was tired now, not just angry. "I know what I know. I don't want to talk about this anymore." "What about Emma? She's asking about you every day. She doesn't understand why you haven't called." There was a long silence. Keisha could hear the television in the background at James's brother's house. "It's better this way," James said finally. "Clean break. She's 8 years old, James. She loves you. You've been her father for 8 years. Apparently I was never her father." The pain in his voice was clear, but it didn't make Keisha feel any better. If anything, it made her angrier. "You know what? You're right. You're not her father. Her father would fight for her. Her father would make sure she was okay before cutting her out of his life. Her father would trust the woman he married." "Don't," James said quietly. "Her father would know that being a parent isn't about DNA. It's about love and commitment and showing up every single day." "I said don't." 8 years, James. 8 years of bedtime stories and scraped knees and school plays and birthday parties. Does that all mean nothing because of one test?" James hung up. Keisha stared at the phone, fighting back tears. Patricia came into the kitchen and saw her face. "Not good," she asked. "He won't even consider that the test might be wrong. And he won't talk to Emma." Patricia shook her head. "That boy is hurting, but he's hurting that baby girl worse." The next morning, Keisha started her new job at the hospital. It felt good to be working again, to be useful, to have something to focus on besides her broken family. During her lunch break, she called the second lab to schedule another DNA test. Then she called the third lab. She was going to get as many tests as possible. If they all came back showing James wasn't Emma's father, then she would have to accept that somehow, impossibly, she had been wrong about something very important. But if even one test came back different, she would have proof that mistakes could happen. Emma started at the local elementary school on Thursday. Patricia drove her on the first day because Keisha was working. When Keisha got home that afternoon, Emma was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. "How was school, baby?" "It was okay. The teacher is nice. But everyone asked where my daddy is." Keisha's heart hurt. "What did you tell them?" "I said he was working far away. Was that okay?" "That was perfect, sweetheart. But it wasn't perfect. Nothing about this situation was perfect. Emma shouldn't have to lie about where her father was. She shouldn't have to start at a new school in a new town because her family fell apart." That night, Keisha got the first call from the lab. The technician's voice was professional but kind. "Mrs. Mitchell, I have your DNA test results. Would you like me to go over them with you?" Keisha's heart was pounding. "Yes, please. The test shows a 99.9% probability that you are the biological mother of Emma Mitchell." Keisha almost laughed. Of course she was Emma's mother. She had given birth to her. And the paternal results. The test shows a 0% probability that James Mitchell is the biological father of Emma Mitchell. The words hit Keisha like a punch. The second test showed the same thing as the first. James wasn't Emma's father. But that was impossible. wasn't it? Keisha sat in her car outside the lab, staring at the phone. 2 tests from 2 different labs, both showing the same impossible result. She called the 3rd lab and scheduled an appointment for the next day, but deep down she was starting to doubt herself. What if she was wrong? What if somehow she had blocked out something terrible? What if there was a night she didn't remember, or a time when she had been so upset with James that she made a terrible mistake? But even as these thoughts went through her head, Keisha knew they weren't true. She had never been with another man. She had barely looked at another man since she met James. She wasn't that kind of person. So how could Emma not be James's daughter? That evening, Patricia made Emma's favorite dinner, spaghetti and meatballs. Emma seemed to be adjusting well to their new life, but Keisha could see the sadness in her daughter's eyes when she thought no one was looking. "Grandma Pat, do you think my daddy will come visit us?" Emma asked over dinner. Patricia looked at Keisha, then back at Emma. "I don't know, sweet pea. But I do know that you are loved very much, right here in this house." "I miss him," Emma said simply. "I know you do, baby," Keisha said. "I miss him too." That night, after Emma was asleep, Keisha called her brother Tyler. He was stationed in Germany, but she needed to talk to someone who knew her, really knew her. Tyler answered on the first ring. "Keisha, Mom told me what happened. Are you okay?" Hearing her brother's voice made Keisha start crying again. "Ty, I don't know what's happening. The DNA tests say Emma isn't James's daughter, but I swear to you, I never cheated. Never. Of course you didn't. That's not who you are. But the tests don't lie, do they?" Tyler was quiet for a moment. "Keisha, do you remember when we were kids and that teacher accused you of cheating on the math test?" Keisha did remember. She was in 7th grade, and Mrs. Patterson was convinced Keisha had copied answers from the boy sitting next to her. Keisha had been devastated because she had studied so hard for that test. "You remember what happened? They made me retake the test, and I got the same score." "Right. Because you hadn't cheated. Sometimes people are wrong, even when they're sure they're right. But this is science, Ty. DNA doesn't lie. Science done by people, Keisha. People who can make mistakes." After they hung up, Keisha went to her mother's computer and started researching again. This time she looked up stories about DNA testing errors. What she found surprised her. There were more cases than she expected. Labs mixing up samples. Contaminated results. Computer errors. Even cases where the lab had the right samples but entered the wrong information into their system. One story particularly caught her attention. A woman in California had gotten a DNA test that showed her husband wasn't the father of their son. They almost divorced over it. But the woman insisted on another test from a different lab, and that test showed the husband was the father. It turned out the first lab had mixed up their sample with another family's sample. Keisha felt a spark of hope. Maybe she wasn't crazy. Maybe there had been a mix-up. The 3rd DNA test was scheduled for Friday afternoon at a lab 2 hours away. Keisha took the day off work and drove Emma there herself. This time she watched every step of the process. She made sure the samples were labeled correctly. She asked for copies of all the paperwork. The technician assured her that their lab had very strict procedures to prevent mix-ups. "We double-check everything," he said. "You should have your results by Tuesday." On the drive home, Emma fell asleep in the back seat. Keisha used the quiet time to think about what she would do if this test came back the same as the others. Part of her was starting to accept that maybe, somehow, James really wasn't Emma's biological father. But that didn't mean she had cheated. There had to be another explanation. Keisha thought about the hospital where Emma was born. It had been busy, understaffed. She remembered nurses coming and going, some of them seeming confused about which patient was which. What if there had been a mix-up there? What if somehow Emma wasn't her biological daughter either? The thought terrified her, but it would explain everything. If Emma belonged to another family, then of course James's DNA wouldn't match. And if Keisha had another baby out there somewhere. Keisha pulled over to the side of the road and called the hospital where Emma was born. The woman who answered was helpful but not very encouraging. "Records from 8 years ago. That's possible, but it would take some time to pull those files. And you'd need to fill out some paperwork. Privacy laws and all that." "I understand. What do I need to do?" "Come in and speak with our records department. They can tell you what forms you need and how long it might take." Keisha looked at Emma sleeping peacefully in the back seat. Her daughter. The child she had raised and loved and worried about for 8 years. It didn't matter whose DNA Emma had. She was Keisha's daughter in every way that counted. But James might not see it that way. James might think that if Emma wasn't his biological daughter, then Keisha had lied to him for 8 years. He might never forgive her, even if she hadn't done anything wrong. That weekend, Keisha tried to keep things normal for Emma. They went to the park and the library. They baked cookies with Patricia. They watched movies and played board games. But underneath it all, Keisha was thinking about Tuesday, when the third test results would come in. On Sunday evening, James called. Keisha almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Keisha. Hi. He sounded different. Tired and confused instead of angry. James. I've been thinking about what you said. About being a father for 8 years. Keisha's heart jumped. And I miss her. I miss Emma. I know the DNA says what it says, but she's still the same little girl who used to fall asleep on my shoulder watching movies. Yes, Keisha said quietly. She is. Can I talk to her? Keisha looked toward the living room where Emma was coloring with Patricia. She's right here. Emma, sweetie. Daddy's on the phone. Emma dropped her crayons and ran to the kitchen. Daddy, when are you coming to see me? Keisha stepped out of the room to give them privacy, but she could hear Emma's excited chatter. When she came back 20 minutes later, Emma was wiping away tears. Daddy says he loves me but he can't come see me right now, Emma said. Keisha took the phone back. James. Keisha, I need you to know something. Even if the DNA tests are right, I still love that little girl. She's been my daughter for 8 years. I can't just turn that off. Then come see her, James. She needs you. I can't. Not yet. Not until I figure out how to handle all this. What about me? What about us? James was quiet for so long that Keisha thought he had hung up. I don't know, he said finally. I honestly don't know. Tuesday morning felt like the longest morning of Keisha's life. She kept checking her phone, waiting for the call from the third lab. Emma went to school as usual, and Keisha went to work, but she couldn't concentrate on anything. The call came at 2:30 p.m. while Keisha was checking on a patient. Mrs. Mitchell? This is Jennifer from GeneTech Labs. I have your DNA results. Keisha stepped into an empty room and closed the door. Yes. The test shows a 99.9% probability that you are the biological mother of Emma Mitchell. And the father? 0% probability that James Mitchell is the biological father. Keisha closed her eyes. 3 tests. 3 different labs. All showing the same thing. James wasn't Emma's father. But Keisha still knew she hadn't cheated. Which meant there was only one other explanation she could think of. After work, Keisha drove straight to the hospital where Emma was born. The records department was on the 3rd floor, in a small office that smelled like old paper and coffee. Mrs. Chun, the records manager, was patient as Keisha explained what she needed. You want to see your daughter's birth records from 8 years ago? Yes. And any records about other babies born that same day or night. Mrs. Chun frowned. Other babies? Why would you need those records? Keisha took a deep breath. I think there might have been a mix-up. A baby switch. Mrs. Chen's eyebrows shot up. A baby switch. Mrs. Mitchell, that's a very serious accusation. I'm not accusing anyone of doing it on purpose. But I know I never cheated on my husband, and 3 DNA tests say my daughter isn't his biological child. The only explanation that makes sense is that somehow the babies got switched at birth. Mrs. Chun was quiet for a moment, studying Keisha's face. You're serious about this? Completely serious. My family is falling apart because of this. I need to know what happened. Okay. I can pull the records from that date, but it will take a few days. And I need to warn you, if there really was a switch, this is going to affect more than just your family. Keisha hadn't thought about that. Somewhere out there, another family might be raising her biological daughter. Another couple might discover that the child they loved wasn't genetically theirs. I understand, Keisha said. But I have to know the truth. Mrs. Chen made some notes. What was the date and approximate time of birth? Keisha gave her all the information. Mrs. Chen said she would call within a week. That evening, Keisha sat Emma down for another talk. She had been thinking about how much to tell her daughter, and she decided that some truth was better than confusion. Emma, you know how Daddy has been upset about some test results. Emma nodded. Well, Mommy is trying to figure out if maybe the test was wrong. Sometimes doctors and labs make mistakes. Like when the nurse at school gave me the wrong medicine that time. Exactly like that. So I'm checking with some people to see if maybe there was a mistake when you were born. Emma thought about this. What kind of mistake? Well, sometimes when babies are born at the hospital, there are lots of babies all at the same time. And sometimes the nurses might accidentally mix up which baby belongs to which mommy. Emma's eyes got wide. You mean I might not be your baby? Keisha quickly pulled Emma into her lap. No, sweetie. You are definitely my baby. I carried you in my tummy for 9 months, and I was there when you were born. But maybe there was another baby born at the same time, and somehow the daddies got mixed up. It was a confusing explanation, but Emma seemed to understand the basic idea. So my real daddy might be someone else. Maybe. But Emma, you need to understand something very important. James will always be your daddy in the ways that matter. He taught you to ride a bike and read bedtime stories and helped you with your homework. Being a daddy isn't just about DNA. Then why is he so upset? Keisha didn't have a good answer for that. Sometimes adults get confused about what's really important. That weekend, Keisha decided to do something she had been putting off. She drove back to her old town to get more of their belongings from the house. James had texted that he would be at his brother's place, so the house would be empty. Walking into her old home felt like visiting a museum. Everything was exactly as she had left it, but it felt different. Smaller somehow. Sadder. Keisha packed more clothes for her and Emma, some photo albums, Emma's favorite toys. She also took important documents, birth certificates, medical records, insurance papers. In James's office, she found something that made her stop cold. A folder labeled DNA test with papers inside. Not just the results she had seen, but correspondence with the lab, emails, even a receipt showing that James had paid for expedited processing. The emails showed that James had been planning this test for months. He had been suspicious and collecting evidence without telling her. One email was dated 6 months ago, asking about the procedures for paternal DNA testing. Keisha felt sick. While she was planning Emma's 8th birthday party, James was planning to test whether Emma was really his daughter. While she was thinking about their future together, he was looking for proof that she had betrayed him. She took the folder with her. If there really had been a baby switch, these papers might be important later. On Sunday, Patricia suggested they go to church. Keisha hadn't been to church much since she married James, but Patricia said it might help Emma feel more settled in their new community. The little church was welcoming, and Emma liked the children's choir. After the service, several people introduced themselves and welcomed them to town. "You're Patricia's daughter," said an older woman named Mrs. Williams. "She's told us so much about you and your little girl." Keisha was touched that her mother had been talking about them. It felt good to be somewhere where people cared about their well-being. On the drive home, Emma asked, "Mommy, are we going to stay here forever?" "I don't know yet, baby. Would that be okay with you?" Emma thought about it. "I like Grandma Pat. And the kids at school are nice. But I miss our old house. And I really miss Daddy." "I know, sweetheart. I miss him too." That evening, James called again. This was becoming a routine. He would call on Sunday evenings to talk to Emma. Keisha was grateful for it, even though the calls were painful reminders of how broken their family was. This time, after Emma finished talking to James, he asked to speak with Keisha again. "Keisha, I've been thinking about what you said about hospital mix-ups." Keisha's heart jumped. "And? It's possible, I guess. I mean, hospitals do make mistakes sometimes. I'm trying to get the birth records from that night, to see if there were other babies born around the same time as Emma. If there was a mix-up," James said slowly, "that would mean Emma isn't your biological daughter either." "I know. How would you feel about that?" Keisha looked toward the living room where Emma was helping Patricia with a jigsaw puzzle. "She's my daughter, James. DNA doesn't change 8 years of love. But what about the other family? What about your biological daughter, if she's out there somewhere?" Keisha had been trying not to think about that. The idea that somewhere there was another 8-year-old girl who was genetically hers but being raised by strangers was almost too painful to consider. "I don't know," she admitted. "I guess we would figure it out together. All of us." "This is so complicated," James said. "It doesn't have to be. Love doesn't have to be complicated. Doesn't it? Keisha, if there really was a switch, then we've all been living a lie for 8 years." "No," Keisha said firmly. "We've been living a truth. Maybe not a biological truth, but an emotional one. Emma is our daughter because we raised her and loved her. That's not a lie. James was quiet for a long time. I want to believe that, he said finally. Then believe it. After they hung up, Keisha felt a small spark of hope for the first time in weeks. James was starting to think about this differently. Maybe, if she could prove there had been a hospital mix-up, they could work through this together. But first, she needed those birth records. She needed to know what really happened 8 years ago. Mrs. Chen called on Wednesday morning while Keisha was at work. Mrs. Mitchell? I've pulled the records you requested. Can you come in this afternoon? Keisha's hands were shaking as she wrote down the appointment time. This was it. She was about to find out what really happened the night Emma was born. She left work early and drove to the hospital. Mrs. Chen's office felt different this time, smaller and more serious. I have to tell you, Mrs. Mitchell, what I found is unusual. Keisha sat down hard in the chair across from Mrs. Chen's desk. What do you mean? The night your daughter was born, there were 3 other baby girls born within a 4-hour window. The maternity ward was extremely busy. We had 2 nurses call in sick, and the remaining staff was overwhelmed. Mrs. Chen opened a thick folder. There are some irregularities in the records from that night. What kind of irregularities? Missing documentation. Incomplete footprint records. And Mrs. Chen hesitated. 2 of the babies, including yours, have the same hospital bracelet number in the initial records. Keisha felt the room spinning. The same number? It looks like someone caught the mistake and corrected it within a few hours, but there's definitely a gap in the chain of custody documentation. What does that mean exactly? Mrs. Chen pulled out several papers. It means that for approximately 3 hours, we have no reliable record of which baby was with which mother. Keisha stared at the papers, but the words seemed to blur together. So there could have been a switch. It's possible. Mrs. Mitchell, I need to tell you something else. If you're right about this, the hospital has a legal obligation to investigate. This would involve the other families. What other families? The 3 other families who had daughters born that night. We would have to contact them and explain the situation. Keisha thought about this. 3 other families who had been living their lives for 8 years, never knowing that one of their children might not be genetically theirs. Do you have their names? Mrs. Chen nodded. I can't give you their personal information, but I can tell you their names. The Hendersons, the Garcias, and the Johnsons. Keisha wrote down the names. What happens next? That's up to you. You can request that the hospital conduct a formal investigation, which would involve contacting these families and potentially arranging DNA tests. Or you can handle this privately. If I do it privately, how would I contact these families? I can't help you with that officially. But, Mrs. Chen lowered her voice. The Hendersons still live in town. Linda Henderson works at the elementary school on Maple Street. The Garcias moved to Phoenix about 5 years ago. The Johnsons moved to Florida, but I think they still have family here. Keisha left the hospital with photocopies of the records and a head full of questions. 3 families. 3 daughters. All born within hours of each other on a chaotic night 8 years ago. That evening, Keisha called James and told him what she had learned. So you were right, he said quietly. There might have been a switch. It's looking that way. Keisha, what are we going to do? If Emma isn't our biological daughter, if there's another little girl out there who is? I don't know yet. I need to think about this. Have you told Emma? Not yet. I want to know more before I say anything to her. That night, Keisha couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the 3 families. The Hendersons, the Garcias, and the Johnsons. One of them was raising her biological daughter. One of them was going to find out that the child they loved wasn't genetically theirs. The next morning, Keisha drove to the elementary school on Maple Street. It was a small school, much like the one Emma was attending now. She asked to speak with Linda Henderson. Mrs. Henderson turned out to be a friendly woman about Keisha's age who worked in the school office. She had brown hair and kind eyes, and when she smiled, Keisha could see the gap between her front teeth that Emma had too. Can I help you? Mrs. Henderson asked. Keisha had practiced this conversation in her head, but now that she was here, she didn't know how to start. Mrs. Henderson, this is going to sound very strange, but I think our daughters might have been switched at birth. Mrs. Henderson's smile faded. I'm sorry, what? 8 years ago, you had a daughter born at Millbrook General Hospital, right? Yes, but I don't understand what you're asking. Keisha explained about the DNA tests, about the hospital records, about the missing documentation. Mrs. Henderson listened with growing concern. You're saying that my daughter might not be my biological daughter? It's possible. And my daughter might be your biological daughter. Mrs. Henderson sat down heavily in her chair. This is crazy. You're talking about my Katie. She's my daughter. She looks like me and my husband. I thought the same thing about Emma. But sometimes we see what we expect to see. Mrs. Henderson was quiet for a long moment. What do you want me to do? I want us to get DNA tests done. All of us. To find out the truth. And then what? If you're right, what happens then? Keisha had been asking herself the same question. I don't know. But don't you want to know? Don't you want to know if somewhere there's another little girl who belongs to you? Mrs. Henderson put her head in her hands. I need to talk to my husband. This is too much. I understand. Here's my phone number. Take some time to think about it. As Keisha drove home, she wondered if she was doing the right thing. Was she helping these families discover the truth, or was she about to destroy 4 families instead of just her own? That weekend, Emma asked if they could visit their old house again. I want to get some more of my books, she said. And I want to see if Daddy left me any messages in my room. Keisha's heart broke a little. Emma was still hoping that James would come home and everything would go back to normal. They drove to the house on Saturday morning. James's car wasn't in the driveway, so Keisha assumed he was still staying at his brother's place. But when they walked into the house, James was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and newspapers spread out in front of him. Daddy! Emma ran to him and threw her arms around his neck. James hugged her tight, and Keisha could see tears in his eyes. Hey, baby girl. I missed you. Keisha stood in the doorway, not sure what to say. James looked different. Thinner, older somehow. There were dark circles under his eyes. Keisha, he said quietly. I was hoping you'd come by. We're just here to get some of Emma's things. Can we talk? Please. Emma was already running upstairs to her room, eager to see her old toys and books. Keisha sat down across from James at the table where they used to eat breakfast together every morning. I've been doing some thinking, James said. About everything you said. About being a father. About what really matters. Keisha waited. I keep remembering the day Emma was born. How happy we were. How perfect she seemed. And I keep thinking about all the days since then. First steps, first words, first day of school. All of that was real, Keisha. All of that matters more than some DNA test. Yes, Keisha said quietly. It does. But I also keep thinking about trust. About how you could have been with someone else and never told me. James, I told you. I never. I know. I believe you now. I mean, I want to believe you. But if Emma isn't my biological daughter and you didn't cheat, then what happened? Keisha told him about her visit to the hospital, about the missing records, about Mrs. Henderson. James listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. So there really might have been a switch. I think so, yes. And somewhere out there is a little girl who's genetically ours. Maybe. James looked up at the ceiling, toward Emma's room where they could hear her playing. What does that mean for us? For Emma? I don't know yet. But James, no matter what we find out, Emma is still our daughter. She's still the same little girl who fell asleep between us in bed every Sunday morning. She's still the same kid who makes up songs in the bathtub and insists on wearing mismatched socks. James smiled for the first time since Keisha had seen him. She does love those mismatched socks. DNA doesn't erase 8 years of love. I know that now. I think I knew it all along, but I was so angry and hurt that I couldn't think straight. Emma came running back downstairs with her arms full of books and stuffed animals. Daddy, can you come live with us at Grandma Pat's house? She has a big backyard and makes really good cookies. James looked at Keisha. I'd like to try to work this out, he said. If you'll let me. Keisha felt hope blooming in her chest for the first time in weeks. What about the DNA tests? What about finding out the truth about what happened at the hospital? We'll figure it out together, James said. Whatever we find out, we'll handle it together. As a family. Emma clapped her hands. Does this mean we can all live together again? Keisha and James looked at each other. There was still so much to work through, so much hurt to heal. But for the first time since this whole nightmare started, Keisha thought they might actually make it. We're going to try, baby, Keisha said. We're going to try. Linda Henderson called Keisha 3 days later. I talked to my husband, she said. We want to do the DNA test. Keisha felt a mixture of relief and nervousness. Thank you. I know this is hard. Hard doesn't begin to cover it. But you're right, we need to know the truth. They arranged to meet at a neutral location, a family restaurant halfway between their two towns. Keisha was surprised by how normal Mrs. Henderson looked. She had expected someone who looked more like her, but Mrs. Henderson was shorter with lighter hair. Her husband, Robert, was tall and quiet. But when their daughter Katie ran in from the playground, Keisha's breath caught in her throat. Katie had Keisha's dark hair and brown eyes. She had Keisha's stubborn chin and the same way of tilting her head when she was thinking. Emma and Katie eyed each other curiously but were soon playing together like old friends. They were the same age, both 8, both in 3rd grade. They could be sisters, Mrs. Henderson said quietly. Yes, Keisha agreed. They could. James had driven up separately, and when he walked into the restaurant, Keisha could see him studying both girls. His face was unreadable. This is surreal, Robert Henderson said. I keep looking at your daughter and trying to see myself in her. I know the feeling, James replied. They arranged for DNA tests to be done that week. Keisha had found a lab that specialized in complex family cases. They would test all 3 adults and both children to determine the biological relationships. What about the other families? Linda Henderson asked. The Garcias and the Johnsons? I tried to contact them, Keisha said. The Garcias moved to Arizona, and I haven't been able to reach them. The Johnsons moved to Florida, but their contact information is outdated. Maybe we should wait until we get our results before we try to involve more people, Robert suggested. They all agreed. One step at a time. That evening, back at Patricia's house, Emma was unusually quiet. What's wrong, baby? Keisha asked. That girl Katie, she looks like me. Yes, she does. And her mommy and daddy seem nice. They are nice. Emma climbed onto Keisha's lap. Mommy, if Katie is supposed to be your little girl, does that mean I'm supposed to be with her parents? Keisha held Emma close. Oh, sweetheart. No matter what any test says, you are my little girl. You will always be my little girl. But what if? Emma, listen to me. Love isn't about DNA. It's about all the days we've spent together, all the hugs and kisses, all the times I've taken care of you when you were sick, all the bedtime stories and Christmas mornings. That's what makes us family. Emma was quiet for a moment. But Katie's mommy loves her too. Yes, she does. And that's okay. Sometimes people can have more than one family who loves them. It was a confusing concept for an 8-year-old, and Keisha wasn't sure she was explaining it well. But Emma seemed to understand. The DNA results would take a week. Keisha tried to keep busy with work and normal activities, but it was hard to concentrate on anything else. James had moved back into their old house, but he drove down to Patricia's every evening to have dinner with Keisha and Emma. It was strange, this new routine, but it felt like they were slowly building something new together. What happens if the tests show that Katie is our biological daughter? James asked one evening as they walked around Patricia's neighborhood. I don't know, Keisha said honestly. I suppose we'd all have to figure out what's best for both girls. And if Emma is our biological daughter after all? Then we rebuild our marriage and move forward. And if Katie is your biological daughter but not mine? Keisha stopped walking. What do you mean? I mean, what if you and Robert Henderson, what if Emma is Robert's daughter and Katie is yours and mine? Keisha hadn't considered that possibility. That would mean there were 2 switches that night. Or one very complicated one. The thought made Keisha's head spin. How many different combinations were possible? How many families could be affected? On Friday, the lab called. The results were ready. Keisha, James, Linda, and Robert met at the lab to hear the results together. They had decided it was better to find out as a group rather than separately. The genetic counselor, Dr. Martinez, was kind but professional. I have your results, she said. This is a complex situation, so let me go through this carefully. Keisha reached for James's hand. Across the table, Linda and Robert were holding hands too. Keisha, you are definitely Emma's biological mother. That was never in question. Keisha nodded. James, you are not Emma's biological father. They already knew that. Robert, you are Emma's biological father. Keisha heard Linda gasp. She looked at Robert, who was staring at the table. Linda, you are Katie's biological mother. And James, you are Katie's biological father. The room was completely silent. Keisha tried to process what she had just heard. Emma was her and Robert's biological daughter. Katie was Linda and James's biological daughter. So there was a switch, Linda said finally. Yes, a complete switch. The girls were switched at birth. Keisha looked at James. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. What does this mean? Robert asked. I mean, practically speaking, what do we do now? Dr. Martinez had obviously dealt with situations like this before. That's entirely up to the four of you. Some families in similar situations have found ways to expand their definition of family. Others have chosen to maintain the status quo. There's no right or wrong answer. They drove home in separate cars, each family needing time to process the news. Keisha felt numb. After all the tests and searching and investigating, she finally had the truth. But the truth was more complicated than she had expected. Emma was her daughter biologically, but James wasn't Emma's father. Katie was James's daughter biologically, but Keisha wasn't Katie's mother. It was like some cosmic mix-up that affected everyone. That evening, Keisha, James, and Emma sat on Patricia's porch and talked about what they had learned. So Katie's daddy is really my daddy? Emma asked. Katie's daddy is your biological father, Keisha explained. But James is still your daddy in all the ways that matter. Emma looked at James. Are you sad that Katie isn't living with us? James was quiet for a long moment. I'm sad about a lot of things, sweetheart. But mostly I'm sad that I wasted so much time being angry instead of appreciating what I have. What do you have? Emma asked. James smiled and pulled her onto his lap. I have you. I have 8 years of being your dad. I have all the memories we've made together. And if I'm very lucky, I might have many more years ahead of us. Even though I'm not your real daughter? You are my real daughter, James said firmly. Being a father isn't about DNA. It's about love and commitment and being there every day. I'm sorry it took me so long to remember that. That night, after Emma was asleep, Keisha and James talked about their future. This doesn't change anything for us, James said. I want to come home. I want us to be a family again. What about Katie? What about her? Don't you want to get to know her? She's your biological daughter. James sighed. I don't know. Maybe. But Keisha, I've spent 8 years loving Emma. She's the daughter of my heart. Katie is a sweet kid, but she's not mine in the way that matters. But you were so upset about the DNA test results. I was an idiot. I was hurt and angry and I forgot what really mattered. I won't make that mistake again. Keisha felt some of the tension she had been carrying for weeks finally start to ease. So what do we do about the Hendersons? We figure it out together. Maybe the girls can spend time with both families. Maybe we can all become friends. I don't know. But whatever we decide together. For the first time in a month, Keisha felt like they might actually be okay. Image prompt 1*2 families meeting in a family restaurant, with 2 8-year-old girls playing together while 4 adults watch with expressions of amazement and concern at how similar the children look. Image prompt 2*, a family of 3 sitting on a porch at twilight, mother, father, and daughter, having a serious but loving conversation while the father holds the child on his lap and looks at her with deep affection. ## Chapter 9. The Hendersons called the next morning. We need to talk, Linda said. About the girls. About what happens now. They arranged to meet at a park halfway between their two towns. It was a beautiful Saturday morning, and both Emma and Katie were excited about playing on the swings and slides. This is so weird, Katie said to Emma as they ran toward the playground. We're like switched sisters. Emma giggled. That's silly. But you're nice. I like you. The 4 adults sat at a picnic table and watched the girls play. It was hard to believe that just a few weeks ago, none of them knew the others existed. I've been thinking about this all night, Linda said. And I keep coming back to one question. What's best for the girls? That's the most important thing, Keisha agreed. Robert cleared his throat. Linda and I talked about this. We don't want to disrupt Katie's life. She's our daughter in every way that matters to us. But we'd like to get to know Emma, Linda finished. If that's okay with you. James looked surprised. You want to get to know Emma? She's our biological daughter, Linda said simply. I carried her in my body for 9 months, even though I didn't know it. I'd like to have some kind of relationship with her, if possible. Keisha felt a stab of something, not quite jealousy, but close to it. Linda was Emma's biological mother. Did that give her some kind of claim? What are you suggesting? Keisha asked carefully. Maybe the girls could spend some time together, Robert said. Get to know each other. And maybe we could all spend some time together too. Like a play date? Emma called from the swings, apparently listening to their conversation. Something like that, Linda called back. Keisha looked at James. He shrugged. I don't see any harm in it. The girls seem to like each other. Over the next few weeks, they started spending more time together as a group. Emma and Katie became fast friends, despite their different personalities. Emma was more outgoing and adventurous, while Katie was quieter and more thoughtful. But they complemented each other well. Keisha found herself studying Linda, looking for similarities to Emma that she might have missed. She found a few: the way Linda laughed, the way she tilted her head when she was concentrating. But mostly, Keisha was surprised by how different Linda was from her. James seemed less interested in getting to know Katie. He was polite to her, but Keisha could see that he didn't feel the same instant connection that Linda seemed to feel with Emma. Is that wrong of me? He asked Keisha one evening. I look at Katie and I can see she's a great kid, but she doesn't feel like my daughter. That's not wrong, Keisha said. Love isn't automatic, even with biology. But Linda seems to really connect with Emma. Maybe that's because she's been wanting another child. She told me they've been trying to have another baby for years. Keisha had mixed feelings about Linda's growing attachment to Emma. Part of her was happy that Emma had another adult who cared about her. But part of her worried about what this might mean for their family. One evening, Linda asked if Emma could spend the night at their house. Just one night, she said. Katie has been asking, and I thought it might be fun for them. Keisha's first instinct was to say no. Emma had never spent the night anywhere except with Patricia or James's parents. But Emma was excited about the idea, and Keisha didn't want to be unreasonable. Okay, she said. One night. That night felt strange. Keisha kept going to check on Emma and remembering she wasn't there. James found her sitting in Emma's empty bedroom at Patricia's house. You okay? He asked. It's weird, isn't it? Letting our daughter spend the night with strangers. They're not strangers anymore. And technically, Linda is Emma's biological mother. Keisha looked at him sharply. Don't what? Don't start thinking of Linda as Emma's real mother. I'm Emma's mother. I've been her mother for 8 years. James sat down next to her on Emma's bed. I know that. I didn't mean anything by it. But Keisha could see that James was thinking about things differently now. Maybe the biological connections did matter to him more than he wanted to admit. Emma came home the next morning full of stories about her sleepover. Katie's house is so cool. And Mrs. Henderson makes the best pancakes. And we stayed up late talking about everything. What did you talk about? Keisha asked. About how weird it is that we got switched. And about how maybe we were meant to be sisters anyway. And about how lucky we are to have 2 families now instead of just one. 2 families. Keisha wasn't sure she liked the sound of that. Over the next month, the sleepovers became more frequent. Emma started spending every other weekend with the Hendersons. Katie came to stay with them a few times too, but it was clear that she preferred her own home and parents. Keisha noticed that Emma was starting to call Linda Aunt Linda and Robert Uncle Robert. She wasn't sure how she felt about that either. One Saturday, Linda called with a request that made Keisha's blood run cold. We're going to Disney World next month for spring break, Linda said. We'd love to take Emma with us. As our guest, of course. Take Emma to Disney World. Just for a week. Katie is so excited about the idea, and Emma mentioned that she's always wanted to go. Keisha felt like she was losing her daughter piece by piece. First the sleepovers, then the aunt and uncle titles, now a vacation. I need to think about it, Keisha said. Of course. Talk it over with James and let us know. That evening, Keisha and James had their first real fight since he had moved back home. I don't like this, Keisha said. They're taking over Emma's life. They're not taking over anything. They're being nice to her. Too nice. Linda is trying to replace me. Keisha, that's ridiculous. Emma loves you. You're her mother. Then why does she seem more excited about going to Disney World with them than she is about anything we do? James sighed. Maybe because they can afford things we can't. Maybe because it's new and exciting. That doesn't mean she loves you any less. Doesn't it? Keisha, you need to stop seeing this as a competition. Linda isn't trying to steal Emma. She's trying to build a relationship with her biological daughter. And what about Katie? Are you trying to build a relationship with your biological daughter? James was quiet for a moment. That's different. How is it different? Because Katie already has parents who love her. She doesn't need me. And Emma already has parents who love her. She doesn't need Linda. Maybe she needs both. Keisha stared at him. Both? You think Emma needs both mothers? I think Emma is lucky to have people who love her. And I think you're being selfish. The word hit Keisha like a slap. Selfish. Yes, selfish. You're so worried about protecting your claim to Emma that you're not thinking about what might be best for her. Keisha felt tears stinging her eyes. My claim? She's my daughter, James. Not my claim. My daughter. She's also Linda's daughter. Biologically. So what are you saying? That biology trumps 8 years of love. I'm saying that maybe there's room for both. That night, Keisha called her mother and cried for an hour. Baby, what are you so afraid of? Patricia asked. I'm afraid of losing her, Mama. I'm afraid that Linda will be a better mother than me. She has more money, a bigger house, a husband who's Emma's biological father. What if Emma decides she'd rather live with them? Keisha, that little girl loves you with her whole. ## Chapter 10, New Beginnings. Keisha wiped away the last tears as she listened to her mother's gentle voice. That little girl loves you with her whole heart, Keisha. No one can take that away. Love isn't a contest. Keisha took a deep breath and looked at Emma, who was quietly drawing at the kitchen table. The past months had been a whirlwind of pain, confusion, and unexpected truths. But through it all, one thing remained clear. Emma was loved, deeply and truly, by more people than she could have ever imagined. The next morning, Keisha and James sat down together, ready to face the future honestly. They agreed to put aside their fears and pride for Emma's sake. They would support her in building relationships with both families, without pressure or resentment. Linda and Robert joined them soon after, and together the four adults crafted a plan that prioritized the girls' happiness and stability. Emma and Katie would continue to see each other regularly, sharing birthdays, holidays, and everyday moments. The families would communicate openly, respecting each other's roles in the girls' lives. James surprised Keisha by volunteering to help with Emma's school projects and weekend activities, showing a renewed commitment to being the father she had always known him to be. Keisha found strength in his support, and slowly, the walls between them began to crumble. One sunny afternoon, the two families gathered at a local park. Emma and Katie played side by side, laughing and chasing butterflies. Keisha watched James push Emma on the swing, his eyes shining with pride and love. She realized then that family wasn't defined by DNA alone. It was built on trust, forgiveness, and the countless moments of care and connection. As the sun set, Keisha felt a quiet hope bloom inside her. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but together, they would navigate it, one step at a time. Because in the end, love was the truth that mattered most.